Welcome to Ancient Awakening with Castalia. I am Castalia, for those of you who don't know, and I do work over on the realm of inspiration and elfianrealm.com to help inspire the collective all in their ascension journey. I work to help heal and guide through my channeled readings and coaching sessions. I am a certified card reader, channeler, and crystal Reiki master, as well as certified in Greek mythology and ancient Greek gods and goddesses. And what better way to combine both of my passions than to uncover the spiritual metaphors hidden in the myths? The teachings and guidelines already have been laid out before us. They are just hidden beneath the surface of stories full of tragedy, heartbreak, war, death, love, and more. The time for metaphors is done, so let's find clarity together through a transformative journey that is Ancient Awakening. And we are currently welcoming you all to episode 3 of Ancient Awakening. Last week in episode 2, we talked about the 12 labors of awakening with the myth of Hercules' 12 labors. And this week, in episode 3, it's another mythological hero's time to shine, Achilles. Every hero has a wound. Achilles was dipped in the divine waters, armored by gods, and destined for glory. But one part of him remained untouched when he was dipped into the river Styx, and that was his heel, the place where mortality whispered through immortality. The question we are trying to answer today is, what is your and our collective all's Achilles heel on the path of ascension? But before we talk about Achilles and his journey, let's reflect on the journal prompts from last week. I am going to, as I did in last week's episode, give a little bit of a summary of my answer to the journal prompts and invite you to answer the ones from last week in the comments if you didn't last week or you want to reshare them, and also be prepared for the journal prompts at the end of this week's episode. So the first journal prompt to be answered from last week was, which of Hercules' labors resonates most with my current spiritual challenge and why? So a little summary of my answer is, honestly, I would say the Idra labor would be one that I keep going back to. I think that that's one of those parts of the spiritual journey, the cord cutting, the cycle breaking parts, where sometimes when you think that you're over something, it can keep coming back and keep regenerating, and you have to keep facing it until eventually you have finally overcome it and it's completely over and gone and done with. And I feel like that can be a challenge when you're about to go into another phase of your journey. It's like being retested with things that you perceived that you may have overcame, but in actuality maybe you haven't, and you have to face it again to make sure that you fully dealt with it before you can move forward in his journey. So that is a very interesting one, that it was disqualified because it's something that we have to revisit again and again. Prompt 2 is, what part of my shadow self have I been avoiding, and how might I begin to face it with courage? So this one feels a little bit more personal, so I'm just going to give a very short summary of my answer to this, because it's a little bit harder to discuss. But I can say that my story with fear is something that is an aspect of my shadow self that I do feel comfortable talking about on this platform, and it's one that I do work with the most, actually. So when I talk about the most, it's the one I try to integrate with the most, is my journey with fear and overcoming fear and how I acted in places of fear. The thing that I work with the most is actually accepting the moments when I felt afraid and not making myself feel guilty for having relapses in my progress with phobia. I think a really big thing is that you can feel like in your spiritual journey you are being punished for not progressing, but it's okay, because sometimes you're tested with something and you're put in a different situation that you could not have possibly been prepared for, and you are acting from, old ideas and old habits, and it's okay, and you can learn, and you don't learn unless you are tested in those experiences. So a big part of my shadow self is accepting the moments where I did not necessarily succeed in the way that I wished to, and overcoming phobia, specifically with my dog phobia journey, which if you want to hear more about that, in the description is An Hour in Golden Sunshine on my Spotify podcast. You can look it up on Spotify, the Bye Bye Phobias season, where I talked about that when I was really going through it, and I've not really done much of an update on that front yet, and maybe one day I will. Maybe if there is a myth that there is something to do with phobia, I can talk about it a little bit more there. So prompt number 3, how do I experience the balance between divine masculinity and divine femininity within myself? So this is something that I genuinely try to do all the time. I try to balance my creativity and creation, my logic and intuition, manifestation and healing. I try my best to balance having a life and living in a physical reality while also being true to my soul and living as a soul within the body. And that is truly the best way to balance both energies. I work to find that balance every day, and I think that when you see spirituality, you can maybe go towards the aspect of being a hermit from the 3D matrix reality, maybe not integrating and trying to exist with the world around you as much because of the disillusionment that can come as a result of starting to awaken. I know this because I did that, and I was not, after a certain point, I was not experiencing balance. I was receiving the message, you are incarnating in the physical for a reason, you have to live in the physical as well. So learning to balance those two things is a really great way to balance divine femininity and masculinity within, learning how to exist in the reality that we have before us now as a awoken soul, and not in a way that you fall back into pride. Kind of a cycle for your own development by thinking that, this is something that some people fall to, is this cycle in the development journey, by thinking that maybe because you've gone through the awakening journey that you're better than those around you, which is not the case. That's the ego, and that's when the ego starts to evolve and use spiritual buzzwords as a way to have control over you and others, which is not for the highest good of anyone. And this is something that I really, really, really try to avoid being a part of. The concept of thinking that I'm better than other people because of the healing that I've done. It's a lot of hard work, and there are so many times I almost gave up, and you cannot judge someone's healing journey by the way that they behave. There are some healers who have actually never healed within themselves, so they are, in quotations, healers. So you never really know. There could also be a light worker who's just having a hard day and kind of has a breaking point and snaps, and it doesn't mean that they're not a good person and they're not, on the path of enlightenment, but sometimes they crack. Sometimes you crack under pressure, and that's our humanity, and it's to be human and have humility is very important to, balance those energies within you. It is an important part of our journey. If you really think about it, we see the divine feminine as our spirituality and the divine masculine as our life in the physical incarnation, and how we balance those two lives as one and have that oneness within is definitely a perspective to look at when I do the work that I do, and when you're thinking of balancing the divine feminine and masculine within you. So prompt number 4 is, what does spiritual strength mean to me, and how have I cultivated it through adversity? So for me, spiritual strength means the ability to keep yourself grounded, awoken and in tune with energy and everything around you, not losing sight of your soul, and walking with your higher self, leading the way in all areas of your life, not just in the spiritual aspects of your life, but also in every area in the physical incarnation, as you work as in your mental body, mental health, and emotional wellness. It's practicing what you preach is a spiritual strength, and being humble and having humility, and acknowledging when you have made mistakes, working to have self-awareness and accountability, and having strong communication and expression of truth and authenticity, and also being honest and compassionate. Actually, I think the most powerful spiritual strength is being compassionate, as well as being grateful as well. And lastly, is the prompt, if I were to design my own 12 labors, what would they be? And what would they teach me? So this one is, for me, I feel like it's so super, super personal. So not one I'm gonna dive into too much, but in general, some things I can think of as like a general experience of what would be like 12 labors in my own life. One would be overcoming the ego, standing up for yourself. There are moments in my life where I definitely had to overcome the ego and the fear of judgment. And at times I had to stand up for myself, breaking free from abuse. So I will always refer to myself as a survivor of any abuse that I endured, instead of a victim, because I definitely had to fight through the other side to break free. And those would be my labors, as well as like my journey with phobia, my experiences with betrayal and recovering from post-betrayal syndrome. Even recovering from like cognitive dissonance is such a huge labor, and something I experienced more recently was uncovering cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is something where you have two opposing realities and you're trying to make sense of them. So recovery and healing, certain things, there are so many aspects of my story, and that's, honestly, 12 Labors of My Life is a really good title for a memoir. Maybe up and coming next. But, we're here more so focused on the myths, so I'm not going to dive fully into my answer for that. But feel free to, in the comments, share yours, and I can share some of mine. I mean, the biggest one for me was definitely leaving my father and breaking free from that, setting myself free, because at the time in society, the type of abuse I endured from him was, narcissistic, emotional, mental, spiritual, sleep deprivation, these sorts of things. My physical well-being was definitely not well, but I didn't have physical marks on my body. So for all intents and purposes, for the court system, he didn't really do anything. And because I kept going to visitation, because I was scared of him due to the manipulation that he was causing me, they couldn't do anything to help me, and I had to do it myself. So that was definitely my big labor, one of my Cerberus labors to break free from at a young age, and end up where I am today. So it's actually, I recommend reflecting on it. I reflected on that prompt a lot, and it's actually a really great prompt to reflect to kind of give yourself a pat on the back for how far you have come. So I give you all a round of applause for how far you have come in overcoming your Herculean tasks and your journey, because I'm sure you'll probably be revisiting them. I've revisited those cycles before, and you just have to keep powering through. So now, that being said, I also want to say that in kind of regards to that, I think a lot of my labors, and in general the labors, have to do with breaking cycles, overcoming fear and the ego, which is pretty much the gist of what Hercules goes through in the 12 labors, is overcoming fear, breaking cycles, clearing karma, overcoming the ego, and what we go through as well when we go through awakening. And also, it's a really big thing that Achilles also will go through. It is mainly like the ego. So that's a really big part of his journey. He gets very prideful, very, very prideful. So his seeking for glory is what causes him his ultimate demise. So next we are going to focus on the story of Achilles and Achilles' heel in regards to the spiritual journey. So let's just get a little summary of his story. So Achilles was born to Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a sea nymph. Thetis tried to make Achilles immortal by dipping him in the river Styx, holding him by the heel, leaving that one spot vulnerable. Later, when he grew up, he became the greatest warrior of the Trojan War. leading warriors and wielding armor crafted by Hephaestus, including the legendary shield of Achilles that symbolized the totality of human experience. Achilles was prophesied to either live a long, obscure life or die young with eternal glory. So he had two paths. And in reality, with our spiritual journey, we do typically have multiple crossroad points. But typically there are two big crossroad points. The one where we awaken or we stay asleep, and where we keep hitting those moments where either we can awaken to our soul and awaken to our truth, or we fall asleep. So we continue staying asleep, rather. We continue being oblivious to the reality of our soul, of the universe, of the divine. We keep being oblivious. So either you keep being oblivious or you awaken. We are challenged with those crossroads, and this really does fit in with the prophecy that was given to Achilles, because he had those two paths, and the glorious path, that's more like the ego path, and living a long life where you can have the potential to grow as a soul more and develop more over a long life, even though it was obscure, is more of the higher spiritual path to take. But see, Achilles did not want to do that. He wanted glory. So aligning with the ego and legacy over longevity, which is truly a spiritual fork in the road. His rage, so he also had a lot of rage. Maybe it was his soul, metaphor in the myth. Maybe it's his soul not agreeing with the path that he chose, because he's angry all the time. I think of times in my life where I felt more angry, and it's because I was not happy with the decisions that I made, and I had to realize I am feeling this discourse within because I'm not in alignment with what is for my highest good, and so I got to pull myself out of the situation and find what is in alignment so I can feel more at peace. So probably his rage, that there's definitely a metaphor there for that. He had a rage about a lot of things, but especially over the death of his closest companion, which led him into a spiral of vengeance. 7 deadly concept, wrath there. He's got pride and he's got wrath. And like gluttony for power, lust for power, greed for power, pride. So this ended up resulting in him killing Hector, which was one of the greatest warriors of Troy during the Trojan War. And ultimately, he was killed by Paris, who was a prince of Troy, who shot an arrow, which was guided by Apollo. So this is very interesting because in Hercules' story, he goes to the Oracle of Delphi to figure out what he can do as repentance for the crimes he committed. And the Oracle at Delphi, Pythia, is considered to have been channeling Apollo, and now in Achilles' story, an arrow guided by Apollo, which was shot into his heel, his only vulnerable spot, is what resulted in his death. So it seems like Apollo has his hand in a lot of the stories of our heroes of myth. Which can be very much symbolic of the fact that Apollo, third eye, seeing the future, seeing the outcomes, what is best for their journey. So for Achilles, he was not going to progress anymore, probably, with where he was going. He had to overcome rage, and that's a very hard thing to overcome. There are different stories and interpretations of his myth, where it could be that at some point by the time that he did die, he did start to kind of overcome that wrath, but his arrogance about being invincible and forgetting that he does have a weakness is what resulted in his death in the end. So now that we have a brief understanding of his story, let's get into the spiritual interpretation of the story, because that is a brief understanding of his story. So firstly, for the ascension journey and Achilles' heel, Achilles' dual nature, being both mortal and divine, born of a sea nymph goddess and a mortal, Achilles he's kind of pulled between two worlds. And this tension can mirror spiritual seekers struggling between the ego and the soul, and the earth and the ether. So we technically are born of the divine and of mortal, so our soul is divine in a way. We're born from divine light and love, we come from the creator, our soul is infinite, and we are mortal in the physical. Our physical form is mortal. So we are, in reality, torn between two worlds. And his story is a metaphor for the integration of shadow and light, which is a central theme of ascension. He really does mirror us as we incarnate in the physical. We do have like that weakness of the fact that we are humans, but our soul is immortal. The common theme mythology is heroes seeking that eternal glory in the sense of them doing one great thing while they are alive, and more concerned about what they do and what they leave behind in their physical life, and not realizing that the soul is infinite. Which in the story of Hercules, he actually is rewarded by immortality when he eventually goes through his whole journey that we learned about in last week's episode. Achilles' story is a little bit different, because he is still stuck in an ego for the most part. So Achilles, as the ascending hero, he represents the solar plexus chakra in overdrive. And in overdrive indeed. Probably also the root chakra in overdrive as well, because he's known for his temper. Like in the Iliads, in the stories of Troy, he is known for his temper. He's angry. He's an angry person. That is solar plexus in overdrive. That is, in a way, he also does lack stability, because in every part of him he's immortal except his heel. So that's near his earth star chakra. That's like where he's grounded. He is kind of lacking stability in that sense, and he's overcompensating for that. He's very consumed with power, identity, ego. And his armor and shield can symbolize spiritual protection, but his heel is the unhealed wound. Because he does have a very powerful, armor and shield of protection, except, his heel is not protected. That's the unhealed wound. And actually, if you ignore something and you think, if I'm in every other area, he was protected, he had his shield, he had his anger, his might, you think in every other way to compensate for the fact that there is something unhealed that will ultimately be his demise. And in your healing journey, if you ignore something so much, it's going to ultimately end up being your spiritual demise in a sense. It's going to keep coming back and haunting you, and it's going to keep coming back stronger and stronger and stronger. One thing I learned, and this was a lesson that I learned like in my life, but I remember my mom telling me it when I was younger, because she was always aware of these things, is if you don't deal with something in the moment, it's going to keep coming back until you deal with it. If you don't break a cycle, you're going to keep experiencing the same patterns until you learn your lesson from it and end it. This was like when I was very concerned. I'm like, in some friendship dynamics and also romantic relationships, I'm like, I feel like I keep attracting like the same types of people, and they end up hurting me in similar ways, and I'm like, am I the problem? And she told me in a sense, yes, because there is a pattern there and I'm not learning the lesson. And because I'm not learning the lesson and I'm not making a change in my actions, then I am attracting similar situations until I learn the lesson and I break the pattern and I go into a path of something new. And it can be really easy to go into something that is familiar because it's not as daunting as having to face something head on that is unhealed. And Achilles really does have that. He has what he is familiar with, what he is comfortable with. He doesn't even think to protect his heel at all. He doesn't even think about that. He is so consumed with what he knows and the way that he presents himself that he doesn't even acknowledge that at all. And that can very much mirror, like, I went through that, people go through that, we all go through that in different ways of that unhealed wound. So it also can represent the shadow self. His choice of glory over peace reflects the temptation of spiritual bypassing, spiritual sloth, chasing divine gifts without doing the inner work. Seen lots of people do this. That's why the biggest thing when anyone says, I want to be a healer, I want to be a channeler, I want to be a card reader, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to work with people, I want to help people. You got to do the inner work first. And sometimes I will literally go on hiatus from being, from doing, readings, working with clients, I take a break. If I'm like, I know I need to heal something, I am not going to do work to help somebody else and try and, bypass and just use this gift without doing the work myself. I don't want to be a hypocrite. I'm going to put myself on pause, and I'm going to do my healing, and I'm going to come back. And some people are like, well, you might not have the luxury to heal. What about, you need a source of income, you need this, you need that. I'm like, no, I am not going to compromise my soul. If you want to hear more about that, in the description is my book, Awakening the Channeler Within. That kind of talks about that concept in that book that I wrote about the fact that you can't bypass the inner work and just start, chasing gifts of the divine. And Achilles is also a cautionary tale of why that is. So the heel and the unhealed wound. So Thetis dipped him in the river Styx, but missed the heel, his only vulnerable spot. Symbolically, this is the blind spot we all carry, the trauma, the fear, or you go with patterns that resist healing. His death by an arrow to the heel shows how unacknowledged wounds can sabotage divine destiny. And this heel, in regards to ascension, represents a few different things. It can represent unhealed trauma, masked by spiritual strength, egoic attachment to be chosen or special, avoidance of vulnerability or emotional depth, fear of surrender to divine will in our spiritual journey. His metaphor begs the question, what parts of you have you armored so well that you forgot to heal it? So, with Achilles, his rage and withdrawal, when he is dishonored, he withdraws from battle. He turns into the rage. He takes the dishonor so personally. It really strikes a chord within him. It's some unhealed wound, and his rage becomes volcanic and deeply personal, and that's tied to honor, pride, and betrayal. This reflects the temptation to disengage from spiritual service when the ego is bruised. His ego was bruised bad. This can be a metaphor of a spiritual tantrum, which implores us to ask ourselves, when the path doesn't go our way, do we retreat or rise? He retreats. So when he's in the battle, he's a warrior, he feels deeply dishonored and offended, and he took it so personally that burst the pride that he withdraws. Instead of standing in his beliefs and be like, okay, this person dishonors me, but I'm not going to stop fighting for what I believe in. His beliefs clearly weren't that strong as well if he were to so quickly withdraw. So also in that speaking of Achilles as a warrior, Achilles' shield, which was forged by Hephaestus, the shield depicts the entire cosmos. War, peace, harvest, dance. It's a mandala, it's a mandala of human experience, showing that Achilles carries all of humanity into battle. This symbolizes the soul's mission, to hold the world within, not just fight for glory, showcasing that spiritual warriors must carry both light and shadow with grace. And Achilles doesn't really carry his shadow very well. He overcompensates by being angry, and that is the price of pride. So glory or longevity. So like I mentioned, Achilles was offered two fates, a long quiet life or a short glorious one. And he chose glory. He chose a decision rooted in ego, legacy, and immortality of name, rather than longevity of life. This is the temptation to ascend for recognition alone, not transformation, to pretend to awaken, and there are people who do this, that's, scam artists. This poses an interesting spiritual dilemma, because not everyone attempts to walk the path of enlightenment for the same reasons or the right ones. So when you are seeking ascension, are you seeking it for the truth and for the healing, or for the triumph of what it may look like to say, I am healed, to those who may have hurt you, to pretend like you're something that you're not? This is a really big discernment thing for your own journey, but also when you are watching people as well. If there is more ego involved, that's not the real path of enlightenment. So Achilles' heel as a spiritual archetype A further deep dive in there, so the hidden wound. The heel is the part untouched by divine waters, the uninitiated shadow. In spiritual terms, it's the place we avoid healing because it's too painful, too buried, or too tied to the identity, the unconscious saboteur, the fear, trauma, egoic patterns that resist transformation. Everyone has a wound, and that wound is not your shame. It is your portal to something more. In Achilles' sense, actually his wound was his claim to fame because he's actually most known for the heel and not for the story of what he did in the Battle of Troy. His legacy is the Achilles heel. And if he worked to heal it, maybe he could have been known for something a little bit more transformative, but he left a spiritual metaphor that really shows the price of ignoring your shadow. On the other side of healing is your highest potential. There could have been more glory for Achilles if he chose a long life, but he wanted the instant glory, and that's the ego. The temptation to ignore your wound. Achilles was glorious, armored, chosen, but he never addressed the vulnerability. Spiritually, this mirrors the temptation to bypass inner work in favor of gifts, power, or recognition. False ascension, rising without rooting. You gotta ground to ascend. You gotta balance with grounding and ascension. That is so important. Ascension without shadow work is just spiritual inflation. The heel will always call you back. You can pretend, you can keep ignoring it, but you will have to face it one way or another. Achilles ignored it to seek his glory, and he had to face it. And it ended in very severe consequences. Don't ignore what you know you most need to heal. Trust me, I know. It's not pleasant. We gotta stop ignoring those wounds and hiding them and overcompensating for them. It is not a chip on your shoulder. That should not be the metaphor. It's your Achilles heel that really affects the way that we behave. It affected the way that he behaved. It made him overcompensate with anger. And this is also a common thing that we do as humans. We can also overcompensate with anger when we don't heal what we know we gotta heal. So it is worth your time to take time to heal. The invitation to surrender. The heel is not a weakness. It is the gateway to humility. True spiritual growth begins when we acknowledge and surrender the part of us we've armored. When the heel or root of the blockage is faced, it becomes a source of wisdom, compassion, and depth. Initiation into wholeness, where the divine and the broken coexist. This is the moment the seeker becomes the sage, the innocent, the naive becomes the wise. Your Achilles heel is not your undoing, it is your becoming. He let it become his undoing because he ignored it, but when you acknowledge it, it becomes that which makes you stronger, that which makes you able to teach and help and guide others, that which makes you able to grow as a soul. So a little ponder I thought of before we go into the affirmations and the journal prompts and conclude this episode is, if the gods knew Achilles would fall by the heel, why did they allow it to remain untouched? Was it fate, or was it a lesson for his soul? Reincarnation is a thing. So, say Achilles was to reincarnate in another life. Is this, or is reincarnating from a previous life, was this a lesson of his soul? It's very interesting to ponder that. So now for the affirmations. So say them with me, and they're going to be in the description, but the affirmations to help you heal your Achilles heel and uncover it. 1, I honor both my power and my tenderness. My vulnerability is sacred. He was scared of his vulnerability. Let's not be scared of ours. 2, I release the need to be perfect. I choose to be whole. Achilles was not whole. He had a vulnerable spot. If he accepted it, he could have experienced that wholeness. That lack of immortality, because of that, due to that weakness he had, he could have accepted all of who he was, and maybe there's a different metaphor of fully becoming immortal when you accept who you are. 3, my wounds are gateways to wisdom. I walk through them with courage. 4, I do not fear surrender. I trust the divine to guide my healing. And 5, I am more than my legacy. I am a soul living and rising beyond the ego. Now for the journal prompts to reflect on and answer in the comments, and I'll talk about the beginning of next week's episode. Where in my life do I feel invincible, and where do I feel exposed? 1. 2. What is my personal Achilles heel, the wound I avoid but know I must face? 3. Have I ever chosen glory over growth? What did that cost me? 4. What armor do I wear to protect myself? And what does it prevent me from feeling? This will be fun to discuss next week. And 5, if I surrender my Achilles heel to divine healing, what would it change? These are powerful. They will be in the description so you can reflect on them. These are very important journal prompts for healing. And, being said, we conclude this episode. Thank you for joining me. And let's see what next week is going to be about. Let's see. Oh, one fell out. Okay, one fell out on its own, but if it's meant to be, I'll pull it again. If it's meant to be, I'll pull it again. Okay. I want to actually pull it from the cup. Okay, here we go. It was not meant to be, yes. Here we have, oh, okay, it's following the pattern. We're following a theme. I like it. Okay, how the 7 deadly concepts damn the soul shown in Greek myth. So we're going to be going back to kind of talking about quite a few Greek myths to talk about this, but actually I think the Achilles story is one perfect example of how pride damns the soul. So maybe we already got 1 out of the 7 taken care of. I'm going to have to find another story of pride to fit in next week's episode, and I will see you then. Keep seeking your ancient wisdom within your soul. Let's keep healing and growing and breaking free from the metaphors. It's time for clarity.